President Spinelli used the word connect a lot there, a very important one. A connection is really what entrepreneurship is, isn't it? It is connection with the people that you work with, the people that you're serving. And of course, it is a connection, if a company is so lucky to have this, a connection across generations, from moving something from one to the next, which of course is more complicated than it sounds. It's not just passing a ball, it is moving from generations, it is adjustment, it is changing for time, for new leadership, and for new markets. And that is the conversation that we're going to have on stage now. Lauri Union is going to be coming up from the Institute for Family Entrepreneurship to have a fantastic conversation with Gustavo and Adriana Cisneros of Cisneros, a globally recognized brand that has moved from one generation to the next. Please welcome them all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you.
I am so pleased to be having a conversation with Adriana and Gustavo Cisneros on one of my favorite topics, family entrepreneurship. And I know all of you are excited to hear their story. It's a fabulous story. Before we get into that, I actually just want to say a couple of words about what is family entrepreneurship. Because typically in a conversation like this, we would be talking about family business. So why am I using these words family entrepreneurship? Well, family entrepreneurship means something very specific here at Babson. And I'll tell you why. Family business is really ultimately a topic about a business. It's a topic about how families impact a business that they control. Family entrepreneurship is actually a topic with a different focus. The focus in family entrepreneurship is on the family. So in family entrepreneurship, what we're doing is we're looking at how a family, through the quality of their relationships, through their values, through their legacy, can create economic and social value across generations and time. Now this is important because entrepreneurial families drive 70% of global GDP. So here at Babson, we see a tremendous opportunity for us to have a global impact by supporting and inspiring families to be able to create growth and positive change. And there are no better examples of a family that has done that than the Cisneroses.
Thank you.
So, Gustavo, you're a legend here at Babson and many other places as well. I'm not sure if many people know that you actually became CEO of the business that your father started when you were only 25 years old. So I'd love to hear more about what that was like and what led to that moment when you took the leadership role at such a young age.
First of all, thank you very much for having us. Adriana and I are delighted to be here. And second, of course, thank you to everyone for coming here, and to all the staff, and to the president, to three presidents who are here. And it's been great coming back, and of course, even better coming back with Adriana. So thank you very much. I wasn't prepared for that, in the sense that my father was a tornado, a giant. People who are here who knew him, he was a larger-than-life personality, a tycoon, you would call it today. Well, a real one, and good heart. He had a stroke, and when he had a stroke, things changed. I was 23, and I had already talked to him how we were going to go about it a few years later. But right there, at that particular moment, we didn't have any plan. So I took over immediately Venevisión, and we had very good management. That was the TV network. And thank God that helped immensely. And then I was able to move the partners around with the idea, because they were not going to be happy with me.
Yeah.
You know, I was young, untested, who knows. But anyway, we were lucky in that sense. We got it together, and that was, Pepsi Cola was the largest combined business combined in Venezuela because they had immense capacity of distribution and advertising and marketing, and he had many other businesses inside. So together with my cousin Osvaldo and my brother Ricardo, we were able to do that. It took a few years to consolidate, so it worked. It worked very well. No planning, but we had an idea. And my father always was my advisor, because even though he was sidelined, we always spoke to each other every day. Like your mother, who is here.
Yes, my mother is here in the audience. So tell us a little more about what the business was like at that time that your father had built. It was already a large company. Of course, you grew it tremendously afterwards. But tell us a little bit about the context of the business.
It was marketing and distribution driven. We had our own brands of soft drinks, 100% owned. We had the best laboratories to do that. So 50% of our bottling business was our own brands, which gave us a great independence from Pepsi Cola. And really the profits came from those brands, and there was a project very tied to my father. He believed in that. At a particular moment where PepsiCo said, no, only Pepsi, Pepsi, Pepsi. Well, we went our own way. And thank God we were completely independent of PepsiCo because of that. But of course, then when he founded Venevision, it was a bankrupt company. It had been taken over by a leftist union. He took it over. It was a complete different business, different world. I loved it in the sense that it really was a window into the world, and it was Hollywood. It was all the glamour that Venezuela didn't have, but that business had. Tough business. Competition was time, life. Competition was my own family, Phelps, which I married later into. Tough family, good family. So that was the ambience. Were we successful? Tremendously successful. We took those two companies, made it into the largest two companies in Latin America, immediate. And then that gave us the basis to go international.
And so obviously the business that you took over at age 25 was quite a large company. And you mentioned before that initially people were not sure if they could accept you as the leader at such a young age. Were there people who helped you to become a legitimate leader?
No, there's a specific family and a specific person in the United States who was immensely helpful, which is David Rockefeller. David recently died, but we had more than 50 years of friendship. He had been my father's banker, much younger than my father, but he was Banco Mercantil was Chase Manhattan there. And Nelson Rockefeller, who had a lot of property there, became both my mentors in the United States when we moved to the United States. I became a trustee of Rockefeller University, Council of Foreign Relations, Council of the Americas, Columbia, you name it, Chase, because I was put to work in exchange for sweat equity. Meaning, I had the connections and we had the credit lines open for us on the strength of their capacity to say, these guys are our guys, you know, they're good, they will pay. So that was extremely kind of them. Patty and I moved to New York for many years. Adriana was part of that experiment. She learned English in New York. So we became a worldwide connected family through the Rockefeller connection, and we put that to good use in the sense that we always paid our debts, and we've been good for our word. So if I have to pick a family, and two persons would be first Nelson in the beginning, and then of course David for 50 years. It was great.
And of course, not everyone can have a Rockefeller as their mentor, but but nonetheless, I think the point is that you identified who could help to give you that early legitimacy by showing their confidence in you, and that is something that helped you in early years.
It was chemistry on both sides. We had many other people, and we did. We had people we probably don't even remember in this room, a giant of banking with George Moore, who was a competitor of David. And I kept that relation apart, but we needed more money than the Chase could give us, so we opened up with Citibank also. And George became a mentor as a paid advisor, so he had another Rolodex. So the Rolodex that David didn't have, George Moore had. So it worked very well.
And I'm curious, and Adriana, you may have a perspective on this as well. You mentioned your father is, I would say, a force of nature, is how I would really describe what you said about him. Are there things about your father that really influenced your leadership, or Adriana, from your what you know, what you've learned, stories you've heard about your grandfather? Are there parts that you see in your father?
Of course. I think. Can everybody hear me? Great. Good morning. Thank you for showing up. I was a little bit nervous about 10 minutes ago, and the room was empty.
Is it filled? I can't see.
Yeah.
Raise your hand back there. Feels better now.
You know, I'm reading a book now called Range. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I definitely recommend that you get it. It's sort of the opposite to Blink, to Lauderdale's Blink, right? And the thesis there is one that's very dear to our heart. It says that you're better off in life being a generalist, because it will, if you're trained in many assets of your life, you'll be able to make smarter choices. And it goes everything from sports to leadership to politics. And the reason I was interested to read that book was because I remember when I was given the opportunity to take over our business, and I was given the space to completely rethink how we were organized as a business. The conversations that we had was my father reminding me that from the beginning, my grandfather had set up a very systematic approach to management in which he believed in having generalists. So he had a core team of 10, 12, 20 executives that were generalists. None of them were specialists. And it was the same team of executives that could be sent to either open a gold mine or a supermarket or a Pepsi-Cola or a TV network or whatever was the venture that we were working on. And it was only after they felt that the business could be done, they started the business, that we would go on and hire the specialists that would be in charge of running the different verticals. That is very much true of the way that my father managed his business. A lot of those guys are still around, and it's amazing. Like, these are the smartest people you can have in the room, mostly because they're very versatile. And they're not afraid of having to go into a business that they know nothing about because they have all the training. And I've taken sort of the trajectory of those first 80 years of that thesis and made it into my own. And it's very much the way that we're running our company today. There's amazing stories. My grandfather was very deliberate about developing this thesis, and he had experts from New York come and study and write the protocol for how to have this amazing team of generalists be the right team for the job. So.
Yeah, and that's a fabulous example, because it's really about how the stories and the actual operation of the business are not exactly staying the same from one generation to the next, but really guiding the generational transition through the business. Fabulous. So, Gustavo, of course, after you took over the business, then you created a global empire. And I've often wondered, what kind of person creates a global empire? How does someone do that? I'd love it if you could just tell us a little bit about what you created, how you created it.
We had an immense failure in Venezuela, which was a very large petrochemical complex which we wanted to set up. And because of political issues, I had to take it back. I had a long conversation, my father was alive, with him, and I have a very good ex-head of state. And he said, Gustavo, you're too big for Venezuela. Leave, go. People don't understand you, you're too big for this. do the same thing in the Middle East, in the United States. And that was very good advice. At the same time, David and Nelson said, come to us, we will give you all the help here. It's much easier to work in the United States. In Latin America, you have to give 10 orders to get something done. Here, it's easy. You get it done, and you forget about it. So that rang a bell, that particular moment when we had that immense failure of Pentacom. So I said, wow, all right, New York. We began to scout, and practically became a deal-making machine. A deal-making machine, a private equity. It wasn't called private equity then. It was other people's money.
Yeah.
But now we call it very elegant. It's private equity. Early on, I took on Teddy Forsman, who was a great entrepreneur, private equity guy. As big, people don't remember him. He was as big as Henry Kravis. Anyway, we bought a bottling company very successfully to prove to everyone that we could do bottling and to do it in the United States. We sold it. Then we bought, we made like 50 deals, but very large. We bought Spalding Evenflow, which was a very large business. We bought it for 300, sold it for 1 billion. The numbers were very good. We had a
yes, definitely.
we had a gigantic also. We had people to do deals with. We thought geographically. I went to Hughes in California, the satellite people, and said, can we do DirecTV in Latin America? DirecTV was not in the United States. But I said to them, Latin America is better. It's underdeveloped, we need it, it's a satellite. And it was a fantastic success. Adriana went with me to Latin America, visited every country, every partner, every head of state. We got the permits and sometimes no permits. President Cardoso said, what do you need from me? I said, in Brazil, I said, you know, nothing. I'm going to do it without your permission. If I ask your permission, it's not going to get done. And he looks at me and says, can you really do that? He says, yes, sir, I can. You please don't complain about it. I will give you educational channels. Well, Cardoso, Brazil was the biggest piece of the pie. And then same thing began to happen. And then, of course, behind my back, the U.S. government was helping immensely. At that time, governments in Washington were very reliable people. We set this gigantic organization up. Adriana was a witness to that, with people with brains, internet in Latin America. It was a dream. Yeah. And of course, we were very successful. We attracted, when you are successful, you attract people bigger than you. So Rupert Murdoch calls me and says, Gustavo, I'm interested in buying your business. I said, Rupert, name your price. I knew that because he was going to set up a service guy. So with Rupert, I always had a very good understanding. Buy or sell, but do it quickly. Before he kills you. Rupert gave me a very good price. Yeah. Gigantic. I mean, it was worth half of that. So we were very happy to do that. Then, then I was extremely interested in television in the United States in Spanish. It was the most underdeveloped market in the whole world. It still is. I mean, we had 30 million people now, 50, but it was a market bigger than Spain or Brazil. We bought a company called Univision from Hallmark. Hallmark was the greeting card. Yeah. They had no idea what they were doing. I went to visit them. I said, let me take this off your hand. They were happy to talk to me, let me tell you. They were bleeding. And not much competition because no one wanted that business. They didn't know what to do with it. I got Emilio Azcárraga, El Tigre, a famous tiger from Mexico who owned the TV network. They said, I need your programming for free. I said, what do you mean? Yeah, we're going to buy Univision. The company doesn't have money. We have to give it for free, and we get 50% of the sales. and I'm going to put my own program in also. So I did that. We agreed. We got a U.S. guy called Jerry Perenke, who was a very famous agent in Hollywood. We needed an American passport. If I had thought back, I would have been that American, but I had Adriana. But I was
10.
10. So we put together that. It became radio, it became internet, it became record, it became the largest, bigger than CBS, NBC, or ABC by itself. We put $300 million, three of us. Half of it we borrowed, private equity again. And then Chase Manhattan again. We sold it for, Steve here, $13.5 billion. And we sold it because, we had to sell it. It's that kind of, I wish I had kept it because the people who are now running are not doing a very good job. But, sometimes when you run other people's money, you have to give back. So we took the money.
That was a pretty nice profit, though.
Yeah, it was okay, yes. It was okay.
So we, I think, did a lot of good in that business. We created a gigantic market. We gave it unity to the Hispanics because there was no unity really. So we did it successfully. We ran that from California. It was a very, very wonderful experience. So between Univision and DirecTV, in between, we had Spalding, big deals. And already Adriana was looking at this and saying, I want to be part of it.
Really?
I think so. We were slowly roping you in.
Yes. So somehow you've made your story seem, I wouldn't say not easy, but we can sort of see how you did it. But yet, of course, it's unbelievable what you did. And I'm curious, Adriana, are there qualities about your father that you would say, because what he did is unique. Are there qualities about your father that you think allowed him to be able to achieve that?
Well, I mean, if my father thought that his father was a tornado, what I have as a father is an entire storm system. It's like there's a new tornado every week. There's definitely a few thing that I think link my grandfather, my father, and I. And unfortunately, I never spent time with my grandfather. He died when I was 1 year old, so I really don't remember him, although I kind of feel like I know him really well, and I get him. My father chose my grandfather, and my grandfather chose my father. My father's one of 8. He has a bunch of older brothers that are absolutely brilliant. But they chose each other, and they decided to have this conversation about taking over the business. And in a very similar way, the same thing happened with us. We can't really explain it. We don't really know how it happened. But we connect in a way that's very special. And it goes obviously beyond love and beyond emotion. We get each other intellectually as well. My grandfather is often described as a trailblazer. My father's described as a pioneer. I think he's crazy. And I usually also feel very alone in the room when I have ideas that I see that no one else is seeing. And the only person that gets me is my father. The times that we've decided to make the boldest changes, the biggest bets, the biggest moves, the only one who has ever gotten me has been my father. Everyone else is willing to listen and to learn, and it takes a few months, and eventually everybody kind of, gets on the same bandwagon. But that's very special. It's very special to be able to have what I now consider, the greatest mentor, where you don't have to do a lot of explaining. It's more about, okay, we get it, how are we going to execute? And that's really fun. And I think there's definitely a genetic thing that happened between the 3 generations in that respect, for sure.
And it's truly a legacy of entrepreneurship. Truly a legacy of creation, of seeing a vision that others can't see, which is incredible.
Yeah.
So Adriana, you were 26, and obviously your father had been thinking about this for quite some time from what he just said. Apparently when you were 10 years old, he was already thinking about this. But perhaps he hadn't said it to you explicitly,
No.
maybe until the time when he approached you at this young age to say that he would like for you to be the next CEO of what was then a company with more than $1 billion of revenue.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what your initial thought was when this topic came up.
So, you know, I'm the youngest of three. When in sort of my formative years was when my father and my mother set up shop in New York and started growing a lot of businesses abroad. And I kind of felt like they loved me, but I was definitely the forgotten one. I was the last one there. I think it had a good effect ultimately. So I must say, even though I had always intended to have a career, I was very much interested in the news aspect. I had a plan to set up a news service for Latin America. I was actually totally surprised when I was tapped by Steven, our former CEO, who trained me, and my father, to see if I would consider the position. You know, there were a few things where I never read it. To begin with, there's no mandate that leadership in the family business has to come from within the family. In fact, between my grandfather and me, so that's three of us, but we've been around for 100 years, you can do the math. We've had many CEOs that have not been related to the family, including Steven, who was with the group for how many years? Sorry? Okay, and was a CEO for, you know, at least half of that. So there was never a sense that it had to happen or that it was going to happen. When I made the mistake of writing a strategy paper of where I thought we had lost our way and where I thought we should be going for the next 50 years, it was sort of an intellectual and academic endeavor. But I could see, you know, this was at the time where our family had to leave as a business and as a family from Venezuela. We had to set up our operations in the US. We were on constant attack by Chavez. We were definitely #1 enemy. He tried to kill my father. It was a very difficult time for us. And I could see that the group had been so focused on surviving that they couldn't get out of survival mode. And innovation along the way and growth along the way had been given the side story. So I pointed to that. And then there was good news and bad news. The good news is that they really liked the paper, and then the bad news is that they said, well, we don't know how to do that, so you have to come and own your ideas. And that was sort of where the more formal yet very secretive conversation began. It was a conversation that only Steven, my father, and I had for about 3.5 years, in which I told them I did not want the job, but I was willing to go through the process to see if I would change my mind. And the process meant going back to school, gaining space within some certain decisions in some of the operations that we were doing so I could learn a bit more. It also meant projecting forward of how we would have to reorganize our family office so that I could deal with the internal politics in a very civilized way if I was about to take over. It's not normal for the youngest to take over, so you can just infer, you know, what the drama that could have been there that we avoided. And, you know, the more I learned, the more I went back to school, the more I started reading about family businesses, and the more convinced I was that I actually had something strategic to offer to the conversation in terms of direction, the more this crazy idea that Steven and my father had started making sense to me. And I think in the 4th year, I said, okay, guys, like, I think we can do this. And then we kind of all came out of the closet and came public with the story. So it was a very, you know, it was, it wasn't forced upon me. They knew that I wasn't ready to make the decision. They were very strategic in their coaching. And it was a very mature, sincere, and transparent conversation. I knew that the moment that I made the decision, it was going to be what I did for the rest of my life. And I knew that my life was going to end up being radically different from the life that I had thought I would have. So at the end, it seems to have worked out now. And, you know, in terms of sort of the age part, what's interesting, I remember telling my dad, I was like, why the rush? You're in super good health. Your brain is sharper than ever. Why don't you take over as CEO from Steven again? You know, demote yourself from chairman and come run the business. It's a lot of fun. You'd be great at it. And I was, you know, 25, 26 when we started having these conversations. And he reminded me, he goes, Adriana, I took over when I was 25, and it was a hot mess. And I needed so much energy and so much passion to be able to fix things and grow things that I think that's the best way. You're gonna need to not sleep. You're gonna need to run you're gonna have to think that you're in a marathon, but you're gonna have to run at sprint speed. And the only way that you can do that is if you start now, not when you're in your 40s. And he was right. He was actually right. So I think contrary to most family businesses out there, you know, he carved out the space so I could take over at a very young age.
And that's very unusual, as you mentioned. Yes. You know, typically in a family business, the older generation may hold on for a long time for various reasons. I'm wondering, Gustavo, I think that you saw something in Adriana before she wrote the paper that led you to think that she would be a great leader for the business. What were the qualities in her that you saw?
We were right in choosing Adriana because she's been there for 6 years now.
Yeah.
It has been a tremendous success. We are doing deals, we are cutting edge, we're everywhere. The energy, it's here. And she's done a fantastic job worldwide. So the decision was right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Steve. So having said that, what happens? It's, I was talking to you earlier. It's chemistry. I had 3 children. You know, I love them absolutely. But I had the chemistry with Adriana, and she had the chemistry with me. She traveled with me. She was little. She was interested in just bringing coffee so she could be listening to business. This is a
I still bring coffee.
All right, so this is an 8-year-old girl. I said, yeah, this is interesting. You know, she gets it. And then I had, when I thought, for instance, she could have been a fantastic head of Univision News very early on. And I proposed to my partners, why don't we make Adriana head of this and make it a worldwide big deal news company. And we were going to go for that. And then in talking to Adriana, I said, you know, I'm not going to give Adriana to these people. I want it for us. She's ready. She's mature. Because we did that exercise, remember?
Yeah.
So she's willing to learn. And we've been right. So, for instance, not only was she, I'm a fanatic for details. She's more detailed than I am. I'm a fanatic about writing good memos. She's the best memo writer I've seen. I'm a fanatic about on time. She's always there. Today, 5 minutes before I did. Always like that. So at the end you say, you know, she gets it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being a good teacher.
Was it, tell me about your relationship just in terms of, because you did, at some level, need to let go to make space for Adriana, and she said that you did that. How do you guys do that? How do you have the relationship where you're still chairman, but Adriana is there as the leader, and you've made that space for her?
Well, you want me to go first, or you want to go first?
I'm going to answer first this
one.
All
right, go ahead.
You know, I think at the beginning he was disciplined about giving me space because he actually wanted me to fail really hard and very early. And that happened a bit, along with the successes. But I think, you know, as things started sort of falling into places, I started noticing when he would call versus when he would not call. And there would be times that we wouldn't talk about work for many, many months, and then there'd be times that he would call me 14 times in a day. And it wasn't, you know, the interest wasn't necessarily linked to the magnitude of the problem I was trying to solve until I realized that at the stage where he was at, he only wanted to call me and talk about the things that he thought were intellectually stimulating and interesting. And he had no intentions of calling me to be like, how are you feeling about taking out the biggest loan you've ever negotiated in your life? No, he thought that was really boring, and that's where I was losing sleep. So we had this incredible moment early on. We had decided to, one of the first ventures that I set up in our company was our digital business. It's now the largest digital advertising network in Latin America. We monetize digital traffic. We represent Facebook in 14 countries. We work with Spotify, LinkedIn, New York Times, et cetera. I have a lot of clients in the audience from Latin America. Thank you for your support. But early on, when we were trying to assemble this team, I wanted to buy a company out of Argentina, and the company was 2 PhD guys. That was the entire company. But what they were doing was that they were building these very interesting algorithms. It's things that we now call AI, but this was pre-AI. And he kept calling me. He goes, oh, but do you think, can I come over to Argentina and meet them? You're going there on your way. And I'm like, yeah, but where are you? He goes, I'm in Spain. And I'm like, okay, I want to put things in perspective. It's going to cost more for your plane to get from Spain to Argentina, like tenfold, than the money we're ever going to make from this little venture with these 2 scientists that we're bringing into the fold. So as long as you understand that that's the math that we're dealing from, of course you're welcome to come. So of course he came. And it was cool, because it wasn't that he was being supportive of Adriana's digital initiative. It's that he actually understood that we were onto something that was going to redefine the group forever. And he wanted to be a part of that ride. And I love the fact that he's such a quick study, that he continues to be extremely curious, that he's always learning. So the enthusiasm goes way beyond the, okay, let's give her space and cheerlead. It's like, no, I want to be part of the growth, and I want to see where this is going.
And what was your perspective on this process of Adriana becoming the leader?
Well, I gave Adriana a lot of space to fail and to make mistakes. I had to be very disciplined. And knowing myself, that was the most difficult thing. Looking at and not calling her and saying, let's do it this way. Because I knew I had not to do that. Because I always have a long-term view. And with Adriana, I had a long-term view that has worked very well. And if I had interfered, then it would have triggered something that would not have been healthy. So after I felt by the way, she's a very secure child. I mean, she was born secure, no insecurity. So, but I didn't want to create any doubts in the minds of the executives or my bankers or our stakeholders. I wanted everyone to know one boss, and it's called Adriana. So that was number 3, and complicated, because I was a very energetic person, still am. So sometimes I instead of calling, I would have taken a plane. I no longer do that, by the way. I no longer show up on an airplane. So Adriana made some very basic decisions to refocus the group, to refocus our executives, to refocus our geography. And I went along with it as a chairman. And I guess the secret is that we talk to each other as much as we need to.
Right.
And
unscheduled. Yeah. The only rule that we have, well, that I have, I'm not allowed to not answer his calls ever. That's it. Yeah. The rest, there's no other ask of him.
True.
But he's right. He's right. It's actually been very helpful to know that we have that direct line.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
So as you've been CEO for 6 years.
Yep.
And of course you've mentioned that you have a vision for the business going forward. And one of the wonderful things about family entrepreneurship is this process that Adriana mentioned earlier, of where the younger generation brings new energy and new vision into the business. So I'd love to hear about your vision for the company.
You know, it's interesting. It's I will describe the businesses that we're in, and you guys are going to think, oh my God, that's so bold and so new. But there is a direct link. We would have never bet on the businesses that we're in today if it wasn't because of the businesses that we were in the past. And there is a definite progression. So in a way, the bold thinking that we're doing today, we owe it to the times of my grandfather and definitely to the businesses that my father set up. So, you know, in a nutshell, when I was getting ready to take over, I realized that I was going to take over a company and have 28 direct reports. And the 28 direct reports, they were mostly guys, and they were mostly over 50, and they had mostly worked in the company for 20 or 30 years. And I'm like, wow, that's going to be really hard. I mean, I'm going to have to convince 28 people that the younger female CEO is going to be the boss. That's going to take a lot of effort. And besides, I don't think I want 28 direct reports. All the science says that 8 is the optimal number. So with Stephen's help and with my father's input, we were able to get rid of that entire structure, got rid of silos, got rid of all these sort of fiefdoms that had developed within the company that were very easy for them to manage because it's executives that had grown up with them, but I was going to have a difficult time. And that was while I was restructuring. You can't restructure for the sake of restructuring. It's much easier to restructure for the sake of a new business opportunity. So we kind of mixed the two things. And we decided that the only business that we would stay in, that was our legacy business, was the media business. We were going to get rid of everything else.
Wow.
And we were going to start 2 brand new divisions. So we started our digital division, and then we started a real estate division. The digital division, which was what I was referring to, the ad network, began because from studying our success with Univision and the amount of money related to advertising for the Hispanic market in the US, we realized that there was no one specialized in digital content for the Hispanic audiences. And that seemed very strange for us because in the United States, Hispanics have always over-indexed in terms of their digital behavior and consumption. That was true from the early days. We realized that there was no agency specializing in the digital Hispanics, and in the big agencies that in the past had teams, maybe had one person in the corner. And we're like, wow, well, that's a lot of money that's being left on the table. That's crazy. We could see the thousands of views that were being generated from our content that wasn't even being posted by us in the US. So we decided to do something about it. And because we were going to do it in the US, and as you know, the digital world has no boundaries, we're like, you know what? Why don't we go and do it in Latin America? And let's go pan-regional from the beginning. So, I moved to Miami. It was 2 of us at the beginning, this amazing guy called Victor Kong. We got on a plane, and the first 6 months we opened, 10 markets. And at the beginning, there were definitely digital pennies was the word that we were using in Latin America, but there was proper dollars being done in the US already. And we were lucky that we could use the cash flow we were generating in the US to, in a way, help us launch our Latin American business. Latin America has leapfrogged. We knew that this was coming. And we've now built, a very successful business around that. That wasn't particularly new. So there was definitely the evolution of from Univision to digital content. But I also remember these incredible stories of starting with my grandfather with Pepsi, but then also of my father, of bringing great American brands to Latin America successfully. So my father was the one that brought Apple computers to Latin America. He brought Burger King. They had, Pepsi Cola and everything that came with it. There was a lot of really cool. My grandfather had brought Ford motor vehicles, and so that was a big part of the storytelling when I was growing up. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't we do the same thing with Facebook? So we pitched Facebook. At that point, Facebook did not work through resellers. So they only monetize advertising in the countries where they had their own operations. And I'm like, well, you guys are leaving so much money on the table. How can you be so big and have so little presence in Latin America? And I went to pitch. We were so new that we weren't even invited to be part of the RFP. We found our way. We were the last people they interviewed. And the only way that I could explain to them why I thought we could do a good job was by telling them about our history and representing great American brands in the region. And we won. And it was sort of a very honest and transparent pitch. And it was cool. At that moment, I realized that the world had changed. And that even the youngest of companies, when they become grown-ups, they realize that having a partner that's been around for 100 years is not a bad thing. It's actually pretty cool. So there's a lot of, I do think that it's all a continuation. We're working on a really cool new project now. I get the shivers just thinking about it. I really think it's probably the most important project I'll ever have a chance to work on. And if we get it right, it's probably going to be the project that will define our business group in posterity. Wow. And it's a project that I would have never been able to dream of or think of or been able to do had it not been for the deal that my father did when he put the DirecTV operations on in Latin America. So my father made a reference that I was sort of part of that deal. I wasn't. I mean, I really was 10, 11, 12, 13. But something strange happened that by pure chance, A few of the times that he went on these big trips to launch DirecTV, I happened to be in spring break or in break from school. And only me, not my older brother, not my only sister. They were in different schools. So one trip that I went, we went to a different city in Latin America every day for 2 weeks straight, where he was signing with the local partner for the DirecTV deal, the contract, and there was a press conference. And each partner was in charge of receiving the satellite signal and distributing it to the clients. I went on that trip, and that's how I actually got to know most of Latin America for the first time. And a couple years later, when we were launching our satellite in Cape Canaveral, it also coincided with like President's Weekend. And I flew down from Deerfield Academy, where I was, and I got to hold my father's hand as we were launching a satellite. The odds were terrible. Insurance itself was $600 million. And there was a 40% chance that the satellite would never make it into orbit. And if it didn't make it into orbit, there was a 2-year waiting list to be able to order a different satellite. So I think that's the most stressful and exciting moment we've ever had as a family. Yeah. It was crazy. And I was small, but I did become extremely interested in satellites after that. And then I started really following the evolution of satellites into nanosatellites, and being fascinated by this notion that a field that was then only accessible to a very few and mostly all regulated through NASA had suddenly become democratized, where anybody who's here, if they want to play in space, they now can. So this new company that we have is called AST & Science. It will be the first company to provide direct-to-device satellite communication worldwide. Direct-to-device meaning any old phone, 2G and forward, will be able to connect directly to a satellite and have connectivity. So we will literally be the ones that connect the world. Connectivity will no longer be a socioeconomic issue. It will no longer be a political issue. And no one's ever going to have to build another cell phone tower again. So it's pretty exciting. And when I met my partner, we have bankers in common who knew that I liked satellites and said, hey, we have a new client and we're raising $800 million. And I said, well, shit, I don't have $800 million right now. I also don't have $400 million, but he's Venezuelan, he's in Miami, he's into satellites. I want to be his friend. Can he come over for 10 minutes in between meetings? And of course, they brought him over. And in about 2.5 minutes, we decided that he was not raising $800 million or $400 million, and that we were coming in pre-Series A as his partners to help him with strategy. The 2.5 minutes only happened because I had context. I knew how we had done it in the past. I knew how my father had launched the DirecTV business. And my partner could see that there was so much value in that knowledge that we were bringing to the table that he was very much willing to rethink his whole strategy and bring us on. And I have to say, right now it feels like the most even partnership I have ever been a part of. My partner, who's an engineer and is brilliant at being an engineer, has utmost respect for what we bring to the table in terms of strategy and deploying a worldwide business venture.
That's amazing to hear about your vision for the business and the satellite venture. That is incredible. Yeah. And also to see the direct line from Diego to Gustavo to you is just incredible. Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned was the fact that this satellite business is going to give access to anyone without regard to socioeconomic position,
right.
Access to satellite. And I know that corporate social responsibility is something that's important to you. And as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the beautiful things about entrepreneurial families who are driving the 70% of global GDP is the opportunity to be able to create social and economic value. So I'd love to hear about your vision in that regard.
Yeah, so I grew up in a household where my parents were true partners. I grew up in a household where, although they never really spoke about work at home, they did speak about how to use their power to change the world into a better place. I grew up in a home where we would sit down at dinner together every night, and while my father was putting together the DirecTV deal, him and my mother realized that we had an opportunity to reform education through connectivity. And that led them to launch the first pan-regional educational channel in that decade in Spanish called Clase, that you could see all the way from Mexico to the South Pole. on this tour that I went to when we were signing all the contracts with local partners, the first clause of that contract said that the partner was committed to distributing the educational signals in the country. And those are signals that don't have any advertising value. So that was sort of a big commitment. And I was like, wow, it's not hidden. It's not like clause 58. It's the first clause of the contract. And it went beyond just launching a TV channel. Then they then went on a second tour working with every educational ministry of every country where the direct TV service was available to make sure that the curriculum that we were putting on TV could be integrated into the national curriculum. I don't know who else has the patience to do that. It was amazing. I also grew up with the parents that when my father decided to launch America Online in Latin America, it was the beginning of connectivity and the internet. They're like, wow, this is so interesting. I wonder how we can use this for education. And they created what was then the first online teacher training platform in the region. This program graduated over 70,000 teachers, and they worked with 12 different universities to develop different curriculum that went from basic things like how to be a better math teacher to more sophisticated things about how to teach conflict resolution at school. And the teachers would join this for free. This was our big CSR play that was linked to that business because we thought how amazing, you know, so we had teachers from the highlands of Peru who were classmates with teachers from Chile or Colombia. These are people that had never necessarily left their own countries. So that was the model, you know, that sort of the bar was always very high. And it's obviously, you know, something that we hold very dear to our heart. And one of the few conditions that I gave my father when we got to the finish line in terms of me taking over is you have to let me run both. You have to let me run the foundation through which we operate our CSR initiatives, and you have to let me run the business. And he didn't want to do it. He's like, it's too much. Because our foundation is very important. He's like, it's going to be too much work. And I said, I'm sorry, I just, you know, my heart beats both ways. And I'm not going to feel complete if I can't do both things. So, you know, when you have role models like that, you can only keep evolving, right? So when I was presented with this opportunity with AST and science, it's a crazy business proposition. It's going to be amazing. We're going to make a lot of money. But the part that I find endlessly fascinating and that I'm trying to begin to understand how to build the framework so that I can understand the impact is the fact that connectivity will be available to all basically for free. And that's extremely, extremely powerful.
That's fabulous. It's fabulous. So you mentioned briefly, very briefly actually, the idea of being a young female leader and in a family business. So there recently was a study by EY that showed that female leadership in very large global scale businesses is about 50% more prevalent in family businesses than in non-family businesses. And I'm wondering
Look at your mother.
Exactly. Me and my mother both. My mother ran our family business, and then I ran it after her. So I'm wondering, Adriana, if you have advice for women who are interested in seeking a leadership role in their family's business.
And both ways. You know, I would say, whether you're a man or a woman, if you're part of a family business, make up your mind very early on and voice your opinion, whether you want to be a part of it or not. I think it takes the equal amount of courage to join the family business than to say, you know what, I really don't want to have anything to do with the running of my family business. That the latter is often most difficult, especially if there's an expectation. I think, you know, I'm intrigued by the statistic. I wasn't aware of it. I could see how that would happen. I do think that when you're running a family business, no matter how professional it is still a family business. And I do feel that female intuition helps you deal with the family aspect of the family business. You know, there is a conversation that you need to have. You need to have the really tough conversations about succession, about entitlement, about the family being able to be involved or not involved, about, you know, how do you set up a family office so that the families doesn't feel that they have, you know, so much power over the business aspect of it. Those are really difficult things, and for some reason I do think that those topics are easier for women to package in a productive way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're right. And Gustavo, you know, I don't think that any father could hope for a daughter who could be a better successor for them in leadership of family business than you have in Adriana. I'm curious if you have any advice for parents who may have a child that they might like to eventually lead their family business in terms of preparation.
You have to give them a very good education. So if they go to Babson, it helps. Adriana chose another path, but it worked out all right. She had to go back to Harvard afterwards. So, no, I made a choice not for my kid not to go to Babson on purpose. I was too much of a shadow at Babson, you know, and I never encouraged Adriana to go to Babson. So now she's back. It's better.
Now I'm back.
A very good education. I would do it in the United States with European and South American component. I would switch a little bit now. I would do heavy engineering. I would do business engineering together. I think that's more of the sort of people we need, and Adriana needs that sort of people, you know, more than ever. So that's going to be a gigantic field. I mean, we're thinking, you know, this company will hire 1,000 engineers, you know, very soon. I mean, we don't have that engineers. So we set up an immense facility in Texas.
Midland, Texas.
Midland, Texas. Because we can get people there, because of tax reasons, Texas people will go from California, and that's where we're going to recruit. So business and engineering numbers, I think that's ticket for my recommendation today to your partner. And talk to them, and have them talk to you. Yeah, it's a two-way street. Kids are plugged into the internet. That's good for me and good for Adriana, it's good for us. But you have to unplug them. You have to talk to them. You have to do things with them. And the only way to unplug them is to go skiing with them, fishing with them, be active with them, you know, and it's a miracle. People become connected to you again. So spending time more than ever is important.
Yeah.
This is fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Lauri, Gustavo, and Adriana for that fantastic conversation. You know, a theme